I am Monique, 34 years old, and as a venture capitalist, I have learned to keep my emotions entirely separate from my business. The air in the boardroom on the 45th floor of the Manhattan skyline was thin and cold, exactly how I liked it. We were in the final hour of closing a $500 million merger for a tech startup I had been grooming for 3 years. Around the mahogany table sat 12 men in gray suits waiting for me to sign the final line. My phone, which I always keep face down during meetings, vibrated against the glass surface. I ignored it. Nothing breaks my focus when I am in the zone, but then it vibrated again and again. A long, continuous buzz that signaled an emergency. I apologized to the board members with a curt nod and flipped the phone over. The name on the screen made my stomach drop, but not because of fear. It was Mrs. Rothstein. She is the 70-year-old president of the Homeowners Association in Sag Harbor, where my vacation home is located. Mrs. Rothstein does not text to say hello. She only texts to complain if your grass is a quarter inch too high. But this text was different. It read, "Monique, if you do not stop this circus in your backyard immediately, I am calling the sheriff to have your property condemned." My heart hammered against my ribs. That house in the Hamptons was my sanctuary. It was my $5 million escape from the noise of the city. More importantly, it was supposed to be empty. I had not been there in 3 weeks, and I certainly had not authorized any guests. I looked up at the waiting investors and forced a calm smile while sliding my thumb across the screen to open my security system app. "Excuse me, gentlemen," I said smoothly, standing up and buttoning my blazer. "I need to take this." I walked out of the conference room and into the hallway, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. My thumb hovered over the camera icon labeled Backyard Pool. I expected to see maybe a stray deer, or perhaps a storm had blown some patio furniture around. But when the live feed loaded in 4K resolution, I nearly dropped my phone. What I saw was not a storm. It was an invasion. My pristine sanctuary had been turned into a fraternity house nightmare. There were at least 30 people swarming my property. I zoomed in on the screen, my breath catching in my throat. They were not just any strangers. I recognized the man floating on a swan inflatable in the middle of my pool holding a beer can. It was Hunter, my sister Ebony's husband. And surrounding him was what looked like his entire extended family, the Kowalskis. I felt a wave of nausea. I had specifically told Ebony that the house was off limits while I was working on this merger. I watched in horror as a heavy-set woman I recognized as Hunter's mother, Brenda, shook a bottle of cheap champagne and sprayed it all over my custom limestone patio. Sticky, sugary alcohol soaking into stone that I had imported from Italy. But that was not even the worst part. I switched the camera angle to the outdoor kitchen area, and that is when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Hunter was standing by the grill flipping burgers. He was sweating profusely in the summer heat, and to wipe the grease and sweat from his face, he was using a robe. Not a towel, not a napkin. He was wearing my vintage silk kimono, the one I had bought at an auction in Kyoto for $3,000. It was a delicate hand-painted piece of art that I only wore on special occasions. And there was Hunter using the silk sleeve to wipe barbecue sauce off his mouth. I zoomed in closer, praying my eyes were deceiving me. They were not. The delicate golden embroidery was smeared with red sauce and sweat. He laughed at something his father said, and then blew his nose into the lapel of my robe. My hands started shaking. Not from nervousness, but from a rage so pure and white-hot it felt like ice in my veins. This was not just a party, this was a violation. This was Ebony knowing exactly how much I valued my privacy and my property, and deciding that her husband's family mattered more. I watched Ebony walk into the frame. She was wearing a swimsuit I had bought her for her birthday, holding a tray of shots. She climbed up onto my outdoor dining table, my white marble table, and started dancing, while Hunter's family cheered her on. She looked so happy, so desperate for their approval. I could hear her faint voice through the camera microphone screaming, This place is practically ours anyway. Drink up, guys. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not call Ebony to ask what was going on. I closed the camera app and opened my contacts. I scrolled past Ebony's name. I scrolled past my parents. I stopped at the contact labeled Sag Harbor Sheriff Department. I pressed call. As the phone rang, I walked toward the elevator, leaving the $500 million merger behind. I had a bigger problem to deal with. And unlike the merger, this deal was not going to end with a handshake. It was going to end in handcuffs. I told my assistant to cancel the rest of my day. I told my driver to take me to the Hamptons immediately. The drive would take 3 hours. That gave me 3 hours to watch them destroy my home through my phone screen. 3 hours to calculate every single dollar they were costing me. And 3 hours to prepare myself for the war I was about to start. Hunter thought he was the king of the castle wearing my silk robe. He had no idea that the queen was coming home, and she was bringing the executioner with her. I did not wait for the elevator. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. By the time I reached the valet stand, my hands were trembling, not from exhaustion, but from the adrenaline of pure, unadulterated rage. My Bentley Continental GT was waiting at the curb, its black paint gleaming under the midday sun. Usually sliding into the driver's seat felt like a hug from an old friend, the smell of hand-stitched leather, and the weight of the door closing out the chaotic city noise. But today, the luxury felt suffocating. I threw my Birkin bag into the passenger seat and peeled out into Manhattan traffic, ignoring the indignant honks of taxi drivers. The moment the car's Bluetooth system connected, I barked a command. Call Sheriff Miller. I knew the sheriff personally. I had donated $10,000 to the Police Benevolent Fund just last Christmas. I expected his booming voice to be reassuring. I expected him to say he was already on his way with sirens blaring to drag these intruders out of my sanctuary. It rang twice before he picked up. Sheriff Miller, I said, cutting off his pleasantries. There are intruders in my home at 42 Ocean Drive. I have visual confirmation via security cameras. I want them arrested. I want them charged with trespassing and breaking and entering immediately. There was a pause on the other end. A long, uncomfortable silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The traffic around me blurred as I focused entirely on his next words. Monique, listen, he said slowly, his voice dropping an octave. My deputies are already there. We spoke to the man. We cannot arrest them. I nearly swerved into the next lane. What do you mean you cannot arrest them? They are strangers destroying my property. I watched a woman pour champagne on my patio 5 minutes ago. Get them out. Sheriff Miller sighed, and I could hear the rustle of papers in the background. The man, Mr. Hunter Kowalski, he produced a lease Monique. A signed residential lease agreement stating he has rented the property for the month of July for the sum of $1. The world seemed to stop spinning. A lease. I had never signed a lease. I had never even discussed renting my sanctuary to anyone, let alone my sister's freeloading husband. It is a forgery, I snapped, my voice rising so loud it echoed in the car. It is a fake document, Miller. You know me. You know I would never rent my home. Arrest him for fraud. It does not look fake to the deputies on the scene, Monique, he said apologetically. And because he has a document granting him residency, this is no longer a criminal trespass case. It is a civil dispute. You will have to take him to housing court to get an eviction order. Until a judge signs off, we cannot touch him or remove him from the premises. If we try, he can sue the department for wrongful eviction. Housing court. That could take months. Hunter knew exactly what he was doing. This was not a drunken whim. This was a calculated hostile takeover. He knew the laws. He knew that if he claimed residency, the police would be powerless. I ended the call without saying goodbye. My grip on the leather steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. They thought they had found a loophole. They thought a piece of paper would protect them. I pressed the accelerator, the engine roaring like a beast waking up. They were about to find out that I did not need the police to handle an eviction. I had my own ways of clearing out pests, and I was coming for them. The trees lining the Long Island Expressway became a blurred tunnel of green and brown as I pushed the Bentley past 90 miles per hour. My hands were gripping the hand-stitched leather steering wheel so hard my knuckles had turned completely white, but I could not feel the tension. The roar of the twin-turbo engine could not drown out the memory of Ebony's voice from just 3 weeks ago. It played on a loop in my head louder than the wind rushing past the windows. I remembered the FaceTime call vividly. It was a Tuesday night. Ebony had been sitting on the floor of her rental apartment, tears streaming down her face, mascara running down her cheeks in thick black streaks. "Monique, please," she had sobbed into the camera, her voice breaking with desperation. "They are going to cut off our lights tomorrow morning. It is freezing in here and the baby has a bad cough. Hunter is trying so hard to find a new client, but his commission check is late. Please, Monique, we have nowhere else to turn." I had felt that familiar pang in my chest, that deep, heavy anchor of guilt that I had carried since we were children. The guilt of being the one who made it out, the one who succeeded. I did not even ask to see the bill. I did not ask why Hunter was home at 2 in the afternoon playing video games in the background. I just opened my banking app and wired $5,000 to her account within 30 seconds. I typed a message that said, "I love you, take care of the baby, not alone, a gift." Because that is what big sisters do. We fix things, we fill the cracks in the foundation so the house does not fall down. Now as I watched the mile markers fly by, the truth hit me harder than the G-force of the car. There was no shut-off notice, there was no late commission check, there was no freezing apartment. That $5,000 was not keeping her lights on. It was buying the kegs of premium beer currently sitting on my limestone patio. It was paying for the crates of organic steaks Hunter was grilling on my barbecue. It was funding the very party that was destroying my sanctuary. She had taken my empathy and weaponized it against me. She had looked me in the eye, cried fake tears, and used my own hard-earned money to entertain a family that looked down on us. The sadness I usually felt for Ebony began to evaporate. It steamed off of me like rain on hot asphalt, replacing itself with something cold and solid. For years I had made excuses for her. I told myself she was just unlucky. I told myself she was a victim of Hunter's incompetence. But you do not accidentally plan a 30-person invasion of your sister's home. You do not accidentally lie about a power outage to fund a vacation. This was malice. This was entitlement wrapped in a sob story. I looked at my eyes in the rearview mirror. The soft, worried gaze of a protective big sister was gone. In its place was the flat, shark-like stare of a venture capitalist who just realized an investment had gone toxic. I was no longer driving to save her. I was driving to liquidate her. I pressed my foot down harder on the gas pedal. The engine screamed in agreement. The Bank of Monique was officially closed, and I was coming to make the final withdrawal. I pressed the call button on my steering wheel, and the ringing sound filled the cabin of the Bentley. My heart was pounding against my ribs, not from fear, but from a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. It rang 4 times. I knew she was looking at the screen. I knew she was debating whether to send me to voicemail. Finally, the line connected, but instead of a greeting, I was blasted with the deafening sound of heavy bass and raucous laughter. "Ebony," I said, my voice low and dangerous, cutting through the noise. "Turn the music down. Now." There was a fumbling sound on the other end, and the music muffled slightly, as if she had stepped into another room, but the background noise was still chaotic. "Hey, sis," she slurred slightly, and I could tell she had already been drinking. "Why are you calling me in the middle of the day? You are supposed to be in your big fancy meeting." I gripped the steering wheel so tight my leather gloves creaked. "Do not play dumb with me, Ebony. I am looking at the security feed. I see Hunter wearing my robe. I see 30 people trashing my patio. And the sheriff just told me you claim to have a lease. Explain to me why I should not drive down there and throw every single one of you into the ocean." There was a pause, and then a heavy dramatic sigh on the other end, the kind of sigh she used to give when our mother asked her to clean her room. "Oh my God, Monique, Are you serious right now? You are literally a millionaire, and you are freaking out over a pool party. You are being so dramatic. I nearly slammed on the brakes. Dramatic. I am dramatic for being upset that my home was broken into. This is not a break in Monique. She snapped, her voice suddenly losing its playful tone and becoming sharp and defensive. We are family. Hunter wanted to do something nice for his parents. They flew all the way in from Ohio, and they have never seen the ocean before. What was I supposed to do? Tell them my rich sister is too selfish to let them stay in her empty mansion. The house just sits there, Monique. You are never even using it. The audacity took my breath away. She was gaslighting me in real time. She was twisting the narrative so that I was the villain for withholding my property, and she was the hero for liberating it. I did not give you permission, Ebony, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And Hunter forged a legal document. That is a felony. Oh, please, she scoffed. It was just a piece of paper so the cops would leave us alone. Hunter said it was just a formality. Why do you always have to make everything about rules and laws? Can't you just be cool for once? Hunter's mom is finally impressed with me. She thinks I pulled this off. Do not ruin this for me, Monique. Do not humiliate me in front of them, just because you are jealous that I have a family and you are all alone in that big, empty apartment. The words hit me like a physical slap. Jealous. She thought I was jealous of her marriage to a man who had to steal my robe to look successful. She thought I was jealous of a family that only liked her because she was spending my money. Get them out, I whispered. No, she said firmly. We are staying for 2 weeks. The lease says so. Deal with it. Then the line went dead. She had hung up on me. She had stolen my house, forged my signature, and then hung up on me because I was ruining her vibe. I stared at the road ahead, the red taillights of the cars in front of me, blurring together. She wanted to play by the rules of that fake lease. Fine, I would play by the rules too. But she forgot that I was the one who wrote the rulebook on hostile takeovers. The navigation system softy announced you have arrived, but I did not need a satellite to tell me I was home. I could hear the bass thumping from a quarter-mile away. I turned the final corner onto the private gravel drive that led to my estate and slammed on the brakes so hard my seatbelt locked against my chest. My mouth fell open. My beautiful custom wrought iron gates, which I had commissioned from a blacksmith in New Orleans, were gone. Well, not gone. They were bent inward at a sickening 45-degree angle, twisted off their hinges like a discarded soda can. And right in the middle of the wreckage sat a massive rusted Ford F-150 pickup truck with a bumper sticker that read, "Local and Proud." They had not just unlocked the gate, they had rammed it. They had treated the entrance to my sanctuary like a demolition derby obstacle. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, my breath coming in shallow gasps. That gate alone cost $25,000. It was art. And they had driven a truck worth less than my handbag right through it. I shifted the Bentley into park, blocking the entire driveway. No one was leaving. I opened the door and stepped out, my Manolo Blahnik heels crunching onto the white gravel. The heat of the afternoon hit me, but I felt ice cold. I slammed the car door shut and the sound echoed like a gunshot cutting through the humid air. I walked past the ruined gate, running my hand over the scratched metal, feeling the jagged edges where the iron had snapped. As I rounded the pristine hedges and the pool area came into full view, the music seemed to falter. The chaos did not stop all at once. It rippled into silence. One by one, the guests noticed me. 30 strangers froze. A man holding a keg over his head stopped mid-chug. A woman in a bikini that was 2 sizes too small lowered her solo cup. They turned their heads in unison. And the look on their faces was not fear. It was not guilt. It was annoyance. They looked at me, the owner of the property, standing in a tailored Givenchy suit next to a $300,000 car, and they sneered. Their eyes raked over my skin, my hair, and my clothes with a mixture of confusion and hostility. In their eyes, I was not the landlord. I was the party crasher. I was the intruder interrupting their family reunion. A heavy-set man near the cooler wiped his mouth with his forearm and squinted at me as if waiting for me to take their drink order. The audacity hung in the air thicker than the smoke from the grill. I stood my ground chin high, staring back at the sea of faces that did not belong here. This was the moment the war truly began. They thought they were looking at an inconvenience. They had no idea they were looking at their eviction notice. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, like a wool blanket in the middle of July. 30 pairs of eyes were staring at me, but none of them held a flicker of recognition. To them, I was not Monique, the owner of this estate. I was an interruption. I was a glitch in their perfect, stolen vacation. I stood there near my battered Bentley, my hand still resting on the hot metal of the doorframe, waiting for someone to say something. Waiting for Ebony to rush forward and explain. Instead, a woman I recognized from the wedding photos waddled toward me. Brenda Kowalski, Hunter's mother. She was wearing a floral caftan that was struggling to contain her and holding a half-empty solo cup of what smelled like cheap boxed wine. She did not look at my face. She did not look at my eyes. She looked at my hands as if checking to see if I was holding a tray. She stopped 3 feet away from me and let out an exasperated sigh that smelled of stale crackers and alcohol. "About time you got here," she snapped, her voice grating like sandpaper against my nerves. "The cooler by the pool is completely empty. We need 3 bags of ice and another case of lime seltzers. And make it quick, Hunter is getting thirsty." My brain actually short-circuited for a second. I stood there in a tailored Givenchy suit that cost more than her entire wardrobe, wearing diamond studs that could pay off her mortgage, and she was ordering me around like I was the help. In her world, a black woman showing up at a service gate could only be one thing: a servant. The casual racism of it was so sharp it almost felt physical, like a needle pricking my skin. She did not see the car, she did not see the posture, she only saw the skin color and assumed I was there to serve her. "Excuse me," I said, my voice low and trembling with restrained fury. Brenda rolled her eyes and waved a hand at me dismissively. "Do not give me attitude. Hunter said he hired extra help for the weekend, so just do your job. The ice is not going to buy itself. Here." She reached into her cleavage and pulled out a crumpled $10 bill, thrusting it toward my chest. I stared at the bill. It was damp with sweat. The disrespect was so absolute, so total, that I almost laughed. But I did not laugh. Instead, I slowly turned my head to look at Ebony. My sister was standing 10 feet away, frozen like a deer in headlights. She was holding a tray of watermelon slices, her knuckles white against the plastic. Our eyes locked. This was her moment. This was the moment she stepped up and said, "Actually, Brenda, this is Monique. This is the owner of this $5 million estate. This is the woman who paid for your son's wedding. This is the woman whose money you are currently eating and drinking." But Ebony did not speak. She saw the look of expectation on her mother-in-law's face. She saw the sneer. And she chose her side. She looked down at her feet, pretending to adjust her sandal strap. She was terrified. She was so desperate to be accepted by this family, so desperate to be seen as one of them, that she was willing to let them treat her own sister like a servant in her own home. She would rather see me humiliated than risk an awkward moment with her husband's mother. That silence hurt more than the gate being smashed. It hurt more than the party. That silence broke something inside me that could never be fixed. I looked back at Brenda, who was still holding out the sweaty $10 bill, and I realized that my sister was gone. The girl I grew up with was dead. In her place was a coward who would sell me out for a pat on the head from people who hated us. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of charcoal and betrayal. I did not take the money. I did not scream. I simply turned my gaze back to the house that was no longer a home. If they wanted to treat me like a stranger, I would show them exactly what a stranger with power could do. Before I could even process the insult from his mother, Hunter stepped between us. He was still wearing my robe, the silk straining against his shoulders as he crossed his arms. He looked at me with a smirk that made my skin crawl. He did not look like a man who had been caught. He looked like a man who had won the lottery. He reached into the deep pocket of the kimono and pulled out a folded piece of paper that looked like it had been through a war zone. It was stained with barbecue sauce and crumpled at the edges. He did not hand it to me. He flicked it at me. The paper fluttered through the humid air and landed on the gravel right next to my designer heels. "Read it and weep." "Monique," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "It is a standard residential lease agreement. Downloaded it from LegalZoom myself. Says right there that I, Hunter Kowalski, am the primary tenant of this property for the next 30 days. I looked down. I did not want to pick it up, but I had to see it. I crouched down, ignoring the popping sound of my knees, and smoothed the paper out on the gravel driveway. My eyes went straight to the bottom line. Rent amount $1. One single dollar for a $5 million estate in the height of summer. And next to it was a signature. It was a scribble. A looping, messy scrawl that looked nothing like my precise, angular signature. It looked like something a third grader would write if they were trying to copy their mother's handwriting. It was a forgery so lazy and so insulting that it was almost funny. But the sheriff had accepted it. To a busy law enforcement officer who just wanted to get back to his patrol, it looked legal enough to keep them from making an arrest. Hunter laughed, a low guttural sound that made my stomach turn. "The cops already saw it," he bragged, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. His breath smelled like cheap beer and onions. "They said it is a civil matter now. You cannot kick out a tenant without an eviction notice, Monique. And you know how long the housing courts in New York take. By the time you get a judge to look at this, we will be back in Ohio, and I will have enjoyed every single inch of this house." He stood back up and winked at his mother. "See, Ma, I told you I handled it. Monique is just here to check on us. She is leaving now." I stood up slowly, dusting the gravel off my hands. He thought he had checkmated me. He thought that piece of paper was a shield. He did not realize that by forging my signature, he had just handed me the weapon I needed to destroy him. He had just turned a family dispute into a federal crime. I looked at the paper one last time, memorizing the jagged lines of that fake signature. He wanted to play lawyer. Fine. I would show him what a real lawsuit looked like. I stepped past Hunter and walked through the front door, my heart hammering a painful rhythm against my ribs. I expected a mess, but I was not prepared for the desecration that awaited me. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was no longer the scent of fresh linen and sea salt that I kept pumped through the HVAC system. It was a thick, suffocating mix of stale, light beer, burnt meat, and cheap floral perfume that clung to the air like a fog. I looked down at my feet and felt a physical, sharp pain in my chest. My imported French white oak floorboards, which cost $40 per square foot, looked like the floor of a dive bar at closing time. There were deep, jagged scratches everywhere. Scuff marks from cheap rubber soles and gouges from stiletto heels dragged carelessly across the grain. Someone had spilled a red, sugary drink near the entrance, and instead of cleaning it up, they had simply walked through it, tracking sticky red footprints all the way down the hallway. Every footprint felt like a stamp of disrespect on my achievements. This floor was the first renovation I had done myself. I remembered kneeling on this wood, checking the grain, making sure it was perfect. Now it was ruined. I forced my legs to move, carrying me into the main living area. My custom cream-colored Italian sofa was covered in damp towels and grease stains from potato chips. But it was what I saw in the corner that made my blood run cold. One of Hunter's nieces, a girl no older than 6, was standing by the west wall. She was holding something gold and heavy in her small hand. My breath caught in my throat. It was my Christian Louboutin lipstick. The Rouge Louboutin in the ornate gold-spiked case that cost $90. It was a collector's item I kept on my vanity tray. I watched in slow-motion horror as the child pressed the wax tip against my custom silk wallpaper. The wallpaper was hand-painted and imported from Japan, costing nearly $300 a roll. The child dragged the lipstick across the delicate fabric, drawing a jagged red smiley face. She pressed harder, and I heard the sickening snap as the expensive lipstick broke in half, the red pigment crumbling onto the beige carpet. The child giggled, looking proud of her artwork. I looked around frantically for a parent. Her mother, Hunter's sister, was sitting right there on my ruined sofa, her feet propped up on my glass coffee table without a coaster. She was scrolling through her phone, completely ignoring her daughter. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling. "Your daughter is drawing on my walls with lipstick." The woman looked up lazily, popping her gum. She glanced at the red smear on the wall, then at me and shrugged. "Relax, Monique. She is just expressing herself. Kids will be kids, right? It is just a wall. You can paint over it. You have the money." She went back to her phone. "It is just a wall. You have the money." The words echoed in my head. They did not see a home. They saw a resource to be exploited. They saw my hard work as a bottomless pit they could take from and destroy without consequence. They were not just messy, they were punishing me. They were punishing this house for being beautiful, and they were punishing me for owning it. I looked at the broken lipstick on the floor and the red stain on the silk wall, and I realized that I could not just kick them out. Kicking them out was too easy. They had treated my sanctuary like a landfill. Now I was going to treat their lives like a business liquidation. I walked past the living room and down the long hallway that led to the master suite. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, echoing like a countdown clock. This room was my sanctuary within a sanctuary, even when I had guests over, which was rare. The master suite was off limits. I kept it locked. I kept it sacred. It was the only place where I could truly take off the armor of being a successful Black woman in corporate America and just breathe. But as I approached the double mahogany doors, my stomach dropped. The wood around the handle was splintered. Raw, jagged shards stuck out from the doorframe where the lock had been forced. They had not just picked the lock. They had kicked it in. They had treated the entrance to my private space like a drug bust. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me instantly. Stale cigar smoke. My grandmother despised smoking. She used to say it smelled like bad decisions. Now her favorite room, the room I had designed to honor her memory, smelled like a cheap pool hall. Hunter's father, Frank, was sitting in my velvet reading chair. He had dragged it from the corner to face the television. His bare feet were propped up on the ottoman, and he was asleep, a half-eaten sandwich resting on his chest. But it was not the sleeping man that made the world stop spinning. It was the small antique side table next to him. The table was a delicate piece from the 1920s. One of the legs had always been slightly uneven, a quirk I never had the heart to fix because it belonged to my grandmother. I looked at the table leg. There was something wedged underneath it to stop it from wobbling. A piece of paper folded multiple times into a thick square. I stopped breathing. I knew that paper. I knew the creamy texture of the stationery. I knew the faint blue ink that bled through the folds. I rushed forward, ignoring Frank, who grunted in his sleep. I fell to my knees and yanked the paper out from under the table leg. The table wobbled and Frank's beer bottle rattled dangerously, but I did not care. I unfolded the paper, my hands shaking so violently I almost tore it. It was covered in dust, and a ring of condensation from the beer bottle had soaked through the center, blurring the ink. But I could still read the opening line. "To my dearest Monique, my shining star." It was the last letter my grandmother wrote me before she passed away. It was the letter where she told me she was proud of me, not for my money, but for my heart. It was the most valuable thing I owned. More valuable than the house. More valuable than the Bentley. And this man, this stranger, had folded it up and jammed it under a table leg because he did not want to spill his beer. I looked at the grease stain smearing my grandmother's signature. I looked at the crinkled edges where the weight of the table had crushed the fibers of the paper. A sound escaped my throat. It was not a scream. It was a sob that sounded like something dying. This was not just disrespect. This was a desecration. They had taken the only piece of pure love I had left in this world and used it as a shim. Frank shifted in the chair, opening one bleary eye. He looked down at me holding the ruined letter and let out a burp. "Hey, keep it down, will you? I am trying to watch the game." The table is wobbly, by the way. You should buy new furniture. Something inside me snapped. Not a little snap. A massive structural failure of my patience. The Monique who tried to be polite was gone. The Monique who worried about family peace was gone. I stood up, clutching the letter to my chest. I looked at Frank, and for the first time in my life I wanted to burn the world down. And I had the matches. I snatched the letter from under the table leg so fast that the heavy antique lamp on top of it wobbled dangerously. I did not care if it crashed. I stood up, clutching the fragile piece of paper to my chest, as if I were shielding a newborn baby from a storm. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear blood rushing in my ears. I smoothed the crinkled edges of the stationery, trying to wipe away the dust and the shame, but the damage was done. My grandmother's handwriting was smeared with floor wax and indifference. Hunter, who had followed me down the hallway, leaned against the doorframe. He was picking his teeth with a plastic straw and watching me with a look of pure annoyance. He did not see a woman mourning a desecrated memory. He saw a buzzkill. He saw an inconvenience. "Oh my God, Monique," he groaned, rolling his eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. "Are you seriously going to cry over a piece of paper? It is literally trash. It is old lady scribbles." We needed to level the table so Frank could watch the game. "Do not be such a drama queen. You are ruining the vibe for everyone. Just put it back or go find a coaster." I froze. The air in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. The tears that had been threatening to spill over suddenly evaporated. The heat in my chest, the burning desire to scream and throw things just vanished. In its place, a cold, heavy silence settled over me. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a tsunami hits the shore. It was the silence of absolute clarity. I looked at Hunter. I looked at his smug face, his sloppy posture, the way he wore my expensive robe like he owned it. And for the first time in years, I did not see my sister's husband. I did not see a family member. I saw a liability. I saw a bad investment that needed to be written off. Screaming at him would give him satisfaction. Screaming would make me the angry, unreasonable sister-in-law. Screaming would validate his narrative that I was crazy. So I did something much scarier. I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was not a polite smile. It was the smile of a shark that just sensed blood in the water. It was the smile I wore when I acquired a competitor and stripped it for parts. It was slow, calm, and utterly terrifying. "You are right, Hunter," I said, my voice smooth and steady, completely void of emotion. "I am sorry. I should not have overreacted. It is just paper after all." Hunter blinked. He looked confused by my sudden change in demeanor. He shifted uncomfortably, pulling the robe tighter around himself. "Yeah, well, exactly. Just chill out, okay? We are just trying to have a good time." I walked toward him. He instinctively took a step back, but I just brushed past him. I paused at the doorway and turned to look at him one last time. My eyes swept over the room, over Frank, sleeping with his mouth open, over the ruined table, over the stain on the carpet. "You guys just relax," I said, keeping that dangerous smile fixed on my face. "Enjoy the house, have a drink, use the pool. Do not let me stop you." I turned and walked away down the hall. I could hear Hunter chuckling behind me, probably thinking he had won, probably thinking he had put me in my place. He had no idea that I was not retreating. I was just moving to higher ground, so I could watch them drown. The time for talking was over. The time for mercy was dead. I walked out the front door past the screaming kids and the spilled beer, and I felt lighter than I had in years. They wanted to play house. Fine. I was about to foreclose on their entire reality. I turned my back on the chaos of the living room and walked out into the humid night air. The bass from the party was still thumping, vibrating the ground beneath my feet, but the noise felt distant now, like it was happening in a different dimension. I walked toward my Bentley, the only clean thing left on the entire property. My hand was reaching for the door handle when I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. Someone was running. For a split second, a tiny, foolish part of my heart sparked with hope. Maybe it was Ebony. Maybe she had woken up. Maybe seeing her husband desecrate our grandmother's letter had finally snapped her out of her trance. "Monique, wait!" Ebony shouted, her voice breathless and slurred. I stopped, but I did not turn around. I waited for the apology. I waited for her to say she was sorry. I waited for her to say she would kick them all out. "Where are you going?" she asked, panting as she caught up to me. "You cannot just leave like this. It makes you look so stuck up. Mom and Dad are going to hear about this, you know." I turned slowly to face her. In the moonlight, she looked like a stranger. The sister who used to braid my hair was gone, replaced by this woman, desperate for the approval of people who hated us. "I am leaving, Ebony," I said, my voice dead calm. "You have the lease right. It is your house now. Enjoy it." I opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool and welcoming against my skin. I reached for the button to close the door, but Ebony lunged forward. She grabbed the edge of the doorframe, her fingers inches from the hinges. "Wait!" she demanded, her eyes darting back toward the house. "If you are leaving, leave the keys." I stared at her, blinking slowly. "Excuse me." "Leave the keys to the Bentley," she said, as if it were the most reasonable request in the world. "Hunter needs to make a beer run, and his truck is blocked in by the gate he smashed. Plus, he has always wanted to drive it. Just let him take it for an hour. Come on, Monique, do not be stingy. You are not even using it tonight." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. After destroying my home, after insulting my grandmother, after forging my signature, she wanted me to hand over the keys to a $300,000 car to her drunk husband. She did not want me to stay. She wanted my resources. She saw me as nothing more than an ATM with a pulse. I looked at her hand resting on my car door. I looked at her expectant, greedy face. And then I looked at the button that closed the door. "Get your hand off my car, Ebony," I said softly. She rolled her eyes, leaning closer. "Oh my God, stop being such a bitch. Just give me the—" I pressed the button. The heavy reinforced door swung shut with the force of a hydraulic press. Ebony shrieked and snatched her hand back a fraction of a second before the door slammed shut with a heavy final thud. If she had been a second slower, her fingers would have been crushed. She banged on the window, her face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. "You almost broke my hand," she screamed, though I could barely hear her through the soundproof glass. "You selfish bitch! Give me the keys!" I did not look at her. I pressed the start button, and the twin-turbo engine roared to life, a low growl that shook the gravel. I shifted into reverse and backed out, spraying small stones onto her shins. She was still screaming in the rearview mirror, a small, angry figure disappearing into the red glow of my taillights. I drove through the ruined gate and onto the main road. I did not cry. I did not shake. I felt lighter. I was going to a hotel, but I was not going to sleep. I was going to war. The valet at Barron's Cove took one look at my face and the dust covering the fenders of my Bentley and knew better than to ask how my evening was going. I tossed him the key fob without a word and marched through the double doors of the hotel lobby. The air conditioning hit me like a physical wall, freezing the sweat on my back. But it felt good. It felt sterile. It felt controlled. I slapped my black card onto the marble reception desk. The sound echoed through the quiet lobby, making the night manager jump. "Presidential suite, indefinite stay. And I need 3 extra Ethernet cables and a pot of black coffee sent up immediately. Do not disturb me for anything less than a fire alarm." 20 minutes later, I was standing in the center of a 2,000-square-foot suite overlooking the harbor. The view was breathtaking, but I pulled the blackout curtains shut with a violent yank. I did not need a view. I needed a bunker. I threw my briefcase onto the mahogany dining table and began to unpack my arsenal. I set up 3 laptops side by side. The first screen displayed my banking interfaces. The second screen was linked to the live security feed of my house, where I could see Hunter now attempting to open a bottle of my vintage Cabernet with a shoe. The third screen was blank, waiting for commands. This was not a hotel room anymore. This was a war room. I picked up my phone and dialed David, my attorney in Manhattan. It was past 11 at night, but David answered on the first ring. He knew that a call from me at this hour meant billable hours were about to skyrocket. David, I said, my voice flat and monotone. I need you to wake up your junior associates. I need an emergency eviction motion drafted by morning. The grounds are fraud, destruction of property, and felony forgery. There was a pause, and I could hear the rustle of sheets. Monique, he asked, his voice thick with sleep. Who are we evicting? My brother-in-law, I replied, and his entire family. I want you to prepare criminal complaints for Hunter Kowalski. He forged my signature on a lease agreement to trick the local police. I want him charged, David. I do not care what it costs. I want him leaving my property in handcuffs, not a moving van. I hung up before he could ask for details. I did not have time for explanations. I dialed the next number. Marcus, my private investigator. Former FBI. Expensive. Ruthless. Marcus, I said as soon as the line connected. I have a job. The target is the Kowalski family from Ohio. Hunter, Frank, and Brenda. They are currently squatting in my Hamptons estate. They are acting desperate, Marcus. They are eating my food like they have not seen a grocery store in months. They are driving a truck that looks like it is held together by duct tape, but they are acting like royalty. Something does not add up. Wealthy people do not squat in their in-laws' houses. I want to know why they are really here. I want their credit reports. I want their court records. I want to know who they owe money to. I need a full dossier on my desk before the sun comes up. I ended the call and sat down in the leather executive chair. The coffee arrived. I poured a cup, black, no sugar. The bitter liquid burned my throat, grounding me. I looked at the 3 glowing screens in the dark room. My sister and her husband were probably laughing right now, thinking they had won, thinking I had run away to cry. They had no idea. I was not crying. I was loading the ammunition. By the time they woke up with their hangovers, I would know every secret they had ever tried to hide, and I would use every single one of them to bury them. The digital clock on the bedside table read 3:14 in the morning when the secure file transfer notification pinged on the center screen. The sound was sharp and loud in the silent hotel suite, making me jump slightly in my leather chair. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I did not care. Marcus, my private investigator, was worth every penny of his $500 hourly rate. He had not just sent a report, he had sent the smoking gun. I clicked open the first folder labeled Hunter Kowalski. I expected to see credit card debt or maybe a gambling problem. I expected to find out he was behind on his car payments. What I saw made me sit up straight in my chair, my eyes widening as I scanned the documents. It was a scanned internal memo from his real estate firm marked confidential. Subject: Hunter Kowalski. Status: suspended pending internal investigation. He had not just taken a week off for a family vacation. He had been suspended. And the reason was right there in black and white. Alleged misappropriation of client escrow funds. Hunter was not just a bad employee, he was a thief. He had been moving deposit money from homebuyers into his personal checking account to fund his lifestyle. He was currently under investigation by his own company, and if they found proof, which Marcus evidently had, he was looking at serious prison time for wire fraud. I opened the second folder labeled The Parents, Frank and Brenda Kowalski, the people who had looked at me with such disdain, the people who treated me like I was the help in my own home. The file was a graveyard of financial ruin. Their house in Ohio was not just empty, it was foreclosed. The bank had seized it 2 days ago. There were repossession orders for their truck and lawsuits from 3 different credit card companies. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a satisfying, terrifying snap. The picture was suddenly crystal clear. They did not come to the Hamptons to see the ocean. They did not come because they wanted to bond with Ebony. They came because they had nowhere else to go. They were homeless. They were running from creditors in Ohio, and they needed a place to hide where no one would look for them. My sister Ebony was not just hosting a party. She was harboring fugitives. A cold, hard laugh escaped my lips. It was the only sound in the room. They had played a bold game. They tried to squat in a $5 million estate because they had lost their own trailer in Ohio. They thought they could bully me into letting them stay because family helps family. They thought if they forged a lease, they could buy enough time to figure out their next scam. But they had made a fatal error. They assumed I was just a rich sister with too much money and no backbone. They did not know that I read financial statements for a living. I looked at the screen at the evidence of their lies and their crimes. They were desperate. And desperate people are dangerous, but they are also fragile. I reached for the phone to call David, my lawyer, back. I did not care if he was sleeping. I did not care if I woke up his entire neighborhood. The narrative had just shifted. This was no longer an eviction. This was a manhunt. And I knew exactly where the targets were sleeping. The sun rose over the harbor, casting a pale gray light into my hotel suite, but I had been awake for hours. I stood by the window watching the sleepy town of Sag Harbor wake up. A mug of black coffee steamed in my hand, the only warmth in the room. My plan was laid out on the mahogany desk behind me, a timeline of destruction calculated down to the minute. At exactly 7 o'clock, I picked up my phone. I did not dial customer service. I dialed the private client direct line for American Express Centurion. The concierge answered on the first ring, his voice hushed and professional, knowing that a call from a black card holder at this hour meant serious business. "Good morning, Monique," he said. "How may we assist you today?" I took a sip of coffee, the bitter liquid sharpening my focus. "I need to report a theft," I said, my voice steady and cold. "It appears my supplementary card holder Ebony has been compromised. I am looking at $50,000 in charges from the last 24 hours that I did not authorize. Please freeze the card immediately and mark those transactions as fraudulent." There was a brief pause on the other end, the sound of typing filling the silence. Then the concierge spoke again, his tone shifting to urgent concern. "Of course, Monique. We are locking the account now. No further charges will be approved. We will open a fraud investigation immediately. Is there anything else?" "No. That will be all," I said. I hung up and set the phone down. I did not feel a shred of guilt. Ebony had treated my bank account like an infinite resource. She forgot that I controlled the flow. I imagined the invisible digital walls slamming down around her, isolating her from the lifestyle she was so desperate to fake. 10 miles away in my master bedroom, Hunter woke up with a mouth that tasted like stale beer and regret. His head was pounding a rhythmic drumbeat of a massive hangover. He groaned and rolled over, burying his face in my Egyptian cotton pillow sheets that were now stained with drool and grease. His stomach growled loud enough to wake the dead. He sat up, blinking against the sunlight streaming through the broken blinds he had damaged the night before. Food. He needed grease. He needed carbs. He grabbed my iPad, which he had stolen from my office, and opened a food delivery app. He punched in an order for 10 large pepperoni pizzas, 5 orders of wings and soda for the army of relatives sleeping on my floor downstairs. The total came to $400. He smirked, tapping the Pay with Apple Pay button, linked to the card I had given Ebony for emergencies. Processing. Processing. He scratched his stomach, waiting for the confirmation screen. Payment declined. Hunter frowned. He tapped retry. Maybe the internet was slow. Payment declined. Please contact your card issuer. What the hell? He muttered, his voice raspy. He sat up straighter, throwing off the duvet. He tried a different card. Another supplementary card I had given Ebony for gas and groceries. Declined. He tried to order just 1 pizza. Declined. Panic started to prick at the edges of his hangover. He shook Ebony, who was sleeping next to him, snoring softly. "Ebony, wake up," he hissed, shaking her shoulder roughly. "Ebony, the cards are not working. I am trying to order breakfast and it keeps saying declined." Ebony groaned, swatting his hand away. "Leave me alone, Hunter. It is probably just a glitch. Try again in 5 minutes." "It is not a glitch," Hunter yelled, throwing the iPad onto the bed. "It says contact issuer. Your sister cut us off." The silence that followed was deafening. Downstairs, 30 people were waking up hungry, expecting a feast. Up here, Hunter stared at the screen, realizing that for the first time in his life, he could not just swipe his way out of a problem. The free ride was over, and they were stranded in a mansion with empty stomachs and a very angry landlord. It was 7:15 in the morning when I made the call that would end Hunter's career. I did not call human resources. I did not call his direct supervisor. I called Robert Sterling, the CEO of Sterling and Partners, the luxury real estate firm, where Hunter had been failing to meet his quotas for 3 years. I knew Robert because my venture capital firm owned 15% of his company. To Hunter, Robert was a god in a corner office. To me, Robert was the guy I played tennis with on Tuesdays. Robert answered on the second ring, sounding surprised to hear from me so early. "Monique, is everything all right? I usually do not hear from you until the quarterly board meeting." "Everything is fine, Robert," I said, my voice crisp and professional. "But I have a compliance issue that I need to bring to your attention immediately. It concerns one of your agents, Hunter Kowalski. I just emailed you a document. I need you to open it right now." I heard the clicking of a mouse on the other end. I waited. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. Then I heard Robert gasp. "Monique, is this what I think it is? It is a residential lease agreement for my property in Sag Harbor," I explained, keeping my tone devoid of emotion. "As you can see, it lists Hunter as the tenant. It lists the rent as $1. And most importantly, Robert, look at the signature. That is a forgery. Hunter used his access to your company's legal templates to draft a fraudulent contract and then forged my signature to deceive the local sheriff." Robert swore softly. For a real estate agent, forgery is not just a fireable offense. It is a career death sentence. It is a violation of ethics that leads to the immediate revocation of their state license. "He did this to you," Robert asked, his voice tight with anger. "He forged a shareholder's signature. He did, I confirmed. And if he is willing to forge a lease to squat in a house, imagine what he is doing with client escrow accounts. I cannot have my name associated with a firm that employs felons, Robert." "You understand my position." "I understand perfectly," Monique, Robert said. "Consider it handled. He is terminated, effective immediately. I am notifying the licensing board within the hour." I thanked him and hung up. I did not smile. I simply closed the laptop. 10 miles away, Hunter was sitting at my kitchen island, trying to figure out why he could not buy pizza. His phone pinged with a notification. It was not a text. It was an email. The subject line read, "Immediate termination for cause." I watched on the security camera as he opened the email. I watched his face go from confused to pale white. I watched him read the words that stripped him of his title, his income, and his future. He dropped the phone onto the counter as if it had burned him. He was no longer a luxury real estate agent on vacation. He was an unemployed fraudster with a criminal record pending, and the day was just getting started. I set the phone down on the mahogany desk and picked up my iPad Pro. Getting Hunter fired was a strategic strike against their future financial stability, but I knew that the pain of unemployment would take days or even weeks to fully set in. I wanted something immediate. I wanted them to feel the consequences of their intrusion right now in their bodies. I wanted to make my beautiful sanctuary as inhospitable as the deserts they seemed to think they owned. I opened my comprehensive smart home application. I had spent nearly $50,000 installing a state-of-the-art automation system that controlled every single circuit in the estate. At the time, Ebony had called it a waste of money. She said I was being paranoid and bougie. Now that very system was about to become my primary weapon of siege warfare. I tapped on the climate control tab. The sensors indicated that the current indoor temperature was a comfortable 68 degrees, thanks to the central air conditioning humming away in the basement. I looked at the security feed. Hunter was slumped on my couch, fanning himself with a magazine, still sweating from the previous night's humidity. I smiled. If he thought it was hot before, he had no idea what was coming. With a flick of my finger, I disabled the cooling system. Then I switched the mode to heat. I dragged the digital dial all the way to the right, setting the target temperature to 99 degrees Fahrenheit. It was the middle of July. Within an hour, that glass-walled house would turn into a greenhouse. The insulation that kept the cold out in winter would now trap the heat inside, creating a stifling, airless oven. I could almost imagine the sweat pooling on Brenda's forehead as the air grew heavy and thick. Next, I navigated to the utilities menu. I found the tankless water heater controls. I imagined Ebony stepping into my rainfall shower, expecting a soothing stream of hot water to wash away her hangover. I tapped the power button, toggling it to off. There would be no hot showers today. There would only be the shocking, freezing jolt of cold groundwater. Finally, I swiped over to the kitchen appliances section. My Sub-Zero refrigerator was a smart model equipped with an electronic child safety lock that could be engaged remotely. I knew exactly what was inside: imported cheeses, organic grapes, bottles of chilled sparkling water, and the leftovers from the steaks they had grilled without my permission. Hunter was starving. His credit cards were declined. His pizza order had failed. He would be heading for that fridge any second now. I tapped the lock icon. On the screen, a small padlock symbol turned red. Access denied. I switched back to the camera feed just in time. Hunter shuffled into the kitchen, scratching his stomach. He reached for the heavy stainless steel handle of the refrigerator and pulled. Nothing happened. He frowned and pulled harder, bracing his foot against the bottom drawer. It did not budge. He looked confused. He tried the freezer. Locked. He banged his fist on the door, shouting something I could not hear, but I could read his lips perfectly. Broken. He thought it was broken. He did not know that the house wasn't broken. The house was rejecting him. I watched him kick the cabinet in frustration before grabbing a glass from the sink to get some tap water. I sat back in my hotel chair, sipping my coffee. The heat was rising. The water was freezing. The food was locked away. The siege had officially begun, and the rats were trapped in the cage. I sat in my air-conditioned hotel suite, watching the chaos unfold on my laptop screen like a director watching the climax of a tragedy. The first crack in their resolve came from the upstairs master bathroom. Even through the security system microphone, I could hear Brenda Kowalski shriek. It was a high-pitched sound of pure shock. A moment later, she burst out of the bedroom wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping wet, and her face bright red with rage. "There is no hot water," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings of the living room. "It is freezing. I turned the handle all the way, and it is like ice water. What kind of cheap plumbing is this?" Downstairs, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The temperature inside the glass-walled house had climbed to 85 degrees and was rising by the minute. The beautiful floor-to-ceiling windows that usually let in the ocean breeze were sealed shut by the central locking system. The house was essentially becoming a terrarium, and the Kowalskis were the lizards trapped inside. Hunter was standing in the kitchen, shirtless, sweating profusely, his chest heaving with frustration. He was still kicking the bottom of the stainless steel refrigerator, which remained stubbornly locked. "This piece of junk is broken," he yelled, kicking it one last time. "Everything in this house is broken. The water, the fridge, even the air conditioning is blowing hot air." Ebony was running back and forth, trying to put out fires that I had started. She looked exhausted. Her hair was frizzy from the humidity, and her eyes were darting around the room in panic. "I will fix it," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I probably just need to reset the breaker. Monique has all this high-tech stuff, it gets glitchy sometimes. Just give me a second." "Fix it," Brenda snapped, marching down the stairs, leaving wet footprints on the hardwood. "You said this place was perfect. You said your sister let us use it because she wanted to treat us. Well, this does not feel like a treat, Ebony. We are starving, we are sweating to death, and I cannot even take a shower without getting frostbite." Hunter slammed his fist onto the marble island. "And I cannot order food," he roared, his face twisting into a snarl. "Every card you gave me is declined, Ebony. Every single one. Does your sister know we are here or not? Because it feels like she cut us off. The room went silent. The 30 guests who had been partying an hour ago were now sitting on the furniture looking miserable and angry. They looked at Ebony not as their generous host, but as a liar who had led them into a trap. I told you she knows Ebony lied, her voice cracking under the pressure. She is just difficult with money. Maybe she forgot to pay the bills. You know how she is. She is so busy with work she forgets things. You are lying, Hunter spat, taking a step toward her. The cards were not canceled because of a missed bill. They said fraud, Ebony. They said stolen. Did you steal this house? Because right now it feels like we are trespassing, and the owner is torturing us. I watched Ebony shrink back against the counter. The walls were closing in on her. The heat was suffocating. The hunger was gnawing at them. And for the first time she realized that her husband and his family did not love her. They loved what she could give them. And now that she had nothing to give, they were ready to eat her alive. I took a sip of my coffee. The show was just getting started. I sat in the hotel suite and opened the Land Rover remote application on my tablet. My finger hovered over the vehicle locator map. The Range Rover Autobiography sitting in my driveway was not just a car. It was a $150,000 tank wrapped in leather and steel. Ebony had begged to borrow it to drive down from the city, claiming her sedan was in the shop. I had agreed because I wanted my niece to travel safely, but now that vehicle was being used as a getaway car for Hunter's beer runs. I tapped the security menu. There was a feature designed for stolen vehicle recovery called remote immobilization. It allows the owner to disable the engine ignition instantly, preventing the car from starting. I did not hesitate. I pressed the button. A small confirmation window popped up asking if I was sure. I tapped yes. Then I dialed the number for a private repossession company I used for my business assets. I need a priority pickup, I told the dispatcher. The vehicle is at 42 Ocean Drive. The driver has unauthorized possession and the keys. Bring the flatbed, and hurry. On the security monitor, I watched Hunter storm out of the house. He was still shirtless, wearing only his cargo shorts and flip-flops. He looked like a man on the edge of a breakdown. He snatched the key fob from the hook by the door and marched toward the black SUV. I could see him muttering to himself, probably cursing me and the broken refrigerator. He yanked the driver's side door open and threw himself into the quilted leather seat. I leaned closer to the screen. This was the moment. He pressed the start button. Nothing happened. No roar of the supercharged engine. No purr of the exhaust. Just a hollow click, and then silence. I watched him press it again, and again. He slammed his hand against the steering wheel. The dashboard screen lit up with a bright red warning message that I knew by heart. Engine disabled. Contact owner. Hunter screamed. I could not hear him through the glass of the car, but I saw his face turn purple. He rolled down the window and shouted toward the house. Ebony, give me the other key. This piece of junk is broken too. But before Ebony could answer, a massive flatbed tow truck reversed through the broken gate. The amber warning lights flashed rhythmically, reflecting off Hunter's sweaty face. The driver, a large man with tattoos covering his arms, hopped out with a clipboard. He did not look like someone who wanted to negotiate. Hunter scrambled out of the car, waving his arms. Hey buddy, you cannot tow this. We live here. It is just a dead battery. The driver ignored him, walking straight to the VIN number on the windshield to verify it. I have a repossession order from the owner, Monique Vance, he said, his voice gruff and bored. Unauthorized use of a vehicle. Step away from the truck, sir. Hunter stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But it is my wife's car, he stammered. The driver did not even look up. He hooked the chains onto the front axle. Then tell your wife she should not have reported it stolen. Hunter watched in helpless silence as the Range Rover was hoisted into the air. The tires left the gravel, and with them went his last connection to the outside world. He was stranded. No car, no food, no beer. And now he had to walk back into that sweltering house and tell his family that he had lost their ride home. I closed the app. Phase 3 was complete. They were not just trapped. They were foot soldiers without a transport. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange that usually brought me peace. But tonight, the sunset was just a backdrop for the final act of my siege. I sat in the darkened hotel suite, illuminated only by the glow of my 3 monitors. I had taken their transportation, I had locked their food, but they were still comfortable. They still had lights to see my ruined floors. They still had television to distract them from their crimes. And most importantly, they still had the internet, which meant they were still connected to the world. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the emergency line for the local power utility company. This was the nuclear option. Voice prompt. Please state the nature of your emergency. I leaned into the microphone, my voice trembling with a practiced fake panic. This is Monique Vance, the homeowner at 42 Ocean Drive. I am not at the property, but I am looking at my remote sensors. I am getting critical heat warnings from the main breaker panel. I think the wiring is melting. There are squatters inside, and I am terrified the house is going to catch fire. You need to kill the power to the grid immediately before the whole place goes up. The operator did not hesitate. Fire hazards are their biggest liability. We are dispatching a crew, ma'am, but for safety, we are initiating a remote shutoff sequence right now. Stay on the line. I looked at the security feed. In the living room, Brenda was yelling at Hunter about the car. The kids were glued to the 70-inch television watching cartoons at full volume. Ebony was pacing, trying to get a signal on her phone. Then it happened. It was not a flicker. It was an instant death. 1 second the room was bathed in the warm glow of recessed lighting and the blue light of the television. The next second, it was pitch black. The silence was sudden and terrifying. The hum of the refrigerator died. The air conditioning vents stopped blowing. The television cut out, leaving a gaping black hole in the wall. The only light came from the few cell phone screens that were frantically being waved around like fireflies in a jar. Then came the screams. The children started crying, immediately plunged into total darkness in a strange house. Brenda shrieked, clutching her chest. What happened? Hunter roared, his voice echoing in the dark. Who turned out the lights? I watched in grainy green night vision as they bumped into furniture and each other. The Wi-Fi is gone, one of the teenagers yelled, holding up a useless tablet. I was in the middle of a game. Ebony fumbled with her phone, turning on the flashlight feature. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dust motes and the panic on their faces. The power is out, she whispered. The whole house is dead. It is not a blackout, Hunter spat, kicking the sofa. Look out the window, Ebony. The neighbors have lights. The street lights are on. It is just us. She did this. She cut the power. The realization hit them like a physical blow. They were trapped in a glass box in the middle of nowhere. No food, no water, no car, and now no light. The temperature was still trapped in the 80s, and without the fans moving the air, the house began to feel like a tomb. I ended the call with the power company and sat back in my chair. They wanted to live in my house for free. Fine. But they were going to live in it on my terms. And my terms were medieval. The darkness inside the house was absolute. Without the hum of the refrigerator or the whir of the air conditioning, the silence was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of Brenda fanning herself with a magazine and the low cursing of Hunter in the kitchen. Ebony sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, staring at her phone. The battery was dying, but she had enough charge for one last desperate gamble. She knew my weak spot. She knew that despite my cold exterior, I had always been protective of our mother. She wiped the sweat from her forehead, took a deep breath to summon the tears, and dialed my number. I sat in the hotel suite watching the call come in. I let it ring twice before answering. I did not say hello. I just listened. Monique Ebony sobbed, her voice cracking with a hysteria that sounded almost genuine. Please, you have to turn the power back on. It is Mom. She is having chest pains. The heat is too much for her. She is lying on the floor and she says she cannot breathe. If anything happens to her, it is going to be your fault. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to kill our mother over a stupid house dispute? I took a sip of my coffee. It was a good performance. A year ago it would have worked. A year ago, I would have been in the car racing over there with paramedics. But tonight, I had the advantage of omniscience. I had the security feed open on my second monitor. I could see our mother clearly in the infrared night vision camera. She was not on the floor clutching her chest. She was sitting at the dining table eating a bag of chips and complaining to Hunter about the lack of ice. She looked perfectly healthy and completely annoyed. "Ebony," I said, my voice cutting through her sobs like a scalpel. "You can stop crying. I can see Mom. She seems to be enjoying those chips quite a bit for someone having a heart attack." Ebony stopped crying instantly. Stopped. The silence on the line was thick. She stammered, trying to pivot to a new lie. "No, she is just trying to stay calm." "Monique, you do not understand." I interrupted her. "No, Ebony, you do not understand. I am done listening to your lies. But since you are in a listening mood, I think there is something you need to hear." I tapped a key on my laptop. I had isolated a clip of audio from the pool camera recorded just 4 hours ago, right before I arrived. I held the phone up to the speaker. Ebony's voice filled the hotel room and simultaneously echoed in her own ear on the other end of the line. It was crisp and clear. "She is so pathetic, Hunter. Just let her pay for the dinner. You know Monique has no life. She thinks her money makes her special, but she is just a lonely, bitter spinster. We are the only family she has. She will never kick us out because she is desperate for us to like her. Just take the card and buy whatever you want. She is basically our ATM." I stopped the recording. Ebony did not say a word. I could hear her breathing jagged and shallow. The mask had slipped. She realized that I had heard the real her, the one who mocked my loneliness while spending my money. "That was you, Ebony," I said softly. "That was you talking about the sister who paid for your wedding. The sister who paid your rent. The sister who just wanted to protect you. So do not talk to me about conscience. Do not talk to me about family. You made it clear that I am just a bank to you. Well, the bank is closed, and the ATM is out of order." I hung up the phone. On the screen, I saw Ebony lower the phone slowly from her ear. She looked around the dark room terrified. She realized then that there was no lie big enough to fix this. She was trapped in the dark with the truth, and for the first time in her life, she had to sit in it. While the Kowalskis were suffocating in the dark sauna that used to be my living room, a new player entered the game from the house next door. Mrs. Rothstein, the 70-year-old president of the Homeowners Association, had not slept. She was standing on her second-floor balcony dressed in a silk robe, holding a glass of scotch in one hand and a high-definition video camera in the other. For years, Mrs. Rothstein had been a thorn in my side, complaining about my hedges being an inch too high or my car being parked at the wrong angle. But tonight, she was not my enemy. She was about to become my most lethal accidental ally. The situation inside my house had devolved into absolute savagery. With the water cut off, the plumbing had stopped working hours ago. 30 people eating, drinking, and using the bathrooms without the ability to flush had created a biohazard. The smell was beginning to drift out of the open vents and across the manicured lawn, wafting up to Mrs. Rothstein's sensitive nose. She wrinkled her face in disgust and pressed the record button on her camera. She focused her lens on my back patio. Inside the dark glass box of the living room, Hunter was losing his mind. The heat was unbearable. He picked up one of my heavy bronze sculptures, a modernist piece worth $12,000, and smashed it against the floor-to-ceiling window, trying to break the glass to get some air. Mrs. Rothstein captured the entire thing. The sound of the glass cracking but not shattering echoed through the night. She did not scream. She did not yell at them to stop. She simply dialed 911 on her speakerphone, ensuring the dispatch operator could hear the destruction in the background. "This is Mrs. Rothstein at 44 Ocean Drive," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "I am reporting a severe public nuisance and active vandalism at the property next door. The smell coming from the house is like a sewer, and I can see individuals destroying the structure. I am currently recording video evidence of a man throwing heavy objects at the windows. The dispatcher tried to ask if it was a domestic dispute, but Mrs. Rothstein cut her off. "This is not a dispute, dear. This is a riot. I have video of them urinating in the bushes because the plumbing is off. I have video of them smashing artwork. This is a health code violation and destruction of private property in a historic district. If you do not send a squad car immediately to arrest these animals, I will be calling the mayor, who is my nephew." She hung up and took a sip of her scotch. I watched all of this from my hotel room, having hacked into the neighborhood security grid. I almost laughed. Hunter thought the police were on his side because he had a fake lease. He did not realize that in the Hamptons, the only thing more powerful than the law is the homeowners association. Mrs. Rothstein had just elevated the complaint from a civil matter to a criminal investigation for vandalism and public endangerment. I watched on the monitor as blue and red lights began to flash in the distance, silent at first, but growing brighter. The cavalry was coming back. But this time they were not coming to check a lease. They were coming because the most powerful woman in the neighborhood had decided the party was over. The trap was fully set, and Mrs. Rothstein had just slammed the door shut. While the chaos at my house was reaching a fever pitch under the watchful eye of Mrs. Rothstein, a different kind of storm was brewing 5 miles away at the Sag Harbor Police Precinct. My attorney David did not drive himself. He stepped out of the back of a black town car, wearing a suit that cost more than the sheriff's annual salary. He carried a leather briefcase that contained the paperwork I had spent the entire night assembling. David is not a warm man, he is a shark in human skin, and I pay him specifically to smell blood. He walked into the station, bypassing the front desk sergeant, and went straight to Sheriff Miller's office, pushing the door open without knocking. Sheriff Miller looked up from his coffee, surprised and annoyed, but the look on David's face stopped any protest in his throat. David did not sit down. He did not offer a handshake. He simply opened his briefcase and laid 3 distinct stacks of paper on the sheriff's cluttered desk. Sheriff Miller. David began, his voice low and devoid of any friendliness. "Yesterday you made a determination that the intruders at 42 Ocean Drive were tenants with a valid lease. You called it a civil matter and refused to intervene. That was a mistake. A mistake that has currently exposed my client to hundreds of thousands of dollars in property damage." The sheriff started to bluster. "Now hold on a minute, counselor. The man had a signed document. We have to respect tenant rights." David cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "That document is a forgery. And I am not just saying that, I am proving it." He tapped the first stack of papers. "This is an affidavit from Monique Vance stating she never signed that lease. This second stack contains a digital forensic analysis of the document Hunter Kowalski presented to you. The signature does not match any of Ms. Vance's official documents. It is a clumsy tracing. And this third stack is the nail in the coffin." David leaned forward, placing his hands on the desk. "This is a sworn statement from the CEO of Sterling and Partners, Hunter Kowalski's former employer. It confirms that Hunter used company software to illegally download that lease template and that he has a history of falsifying documents. This is not a landlord-tenant dispute, Sheriff. This is fraud. This is felony forgery. And by allowing him to stay in that house based on a fake document, you are currently aiding and abetting a criminal act." Sheriff Miller went pale. He picked up the documents, his eyes scanning the damning evidence. He realized in that moment that he had been played by a con artist in a silk robe. He realized that if he did not act, he was going to be the one named in the lawsuit David was already drafting in his head. So David said, straightening his tie, "You have 2 choices. You can continue to call this a civil matter, in which case I will have a judge on the phone in 10 minutes and a lawsuit filed against this department by noon. Or you can reclassify this call." Sheriff Miller swallowed hard. He looked at the paperwork, then up at David. He reached for his radio, his hand trembling slightly. "Dispatch," he said into the receiver, his voice tight. "Change the status on the Ocean Drive call. This is no longer a civil dispute. We have probable cause for burglary in the second-degree forgery and criminal mischief. Authorize a tactical entry." David smiled, a thin, cold smile that did not reach his eyes. Thank you, Sheriff. I suggest you hurry. My client is very unhappy. The legal shield Hunter thought he had was gone. The paper he waved in my face was now the warrant for his arrest. The civil protection had dissolved, leaving him exposed as exactly what he was, a criminal intruder, and now the law was coming to treat him like one. I stood in the empty parking lot of the local marina, which served as our staging ground. The salt air was cool against my skin, but my blood was running hot. I was not just relying on the sheriff this time. I had learned my lesson about trusting public servants to handle personal business. Next to my Bentley, 4 matte black SUVs idled their engines, creating a low rumbling vibration in the ground. The doors opened in unison, and 4 men stepped out. These were not security guards. These were private contractors from a firm called Blackwatch, usually hired to protect diplomats in war zones. They were massive, standing over 6 feet 5 inches tall, with necks as thick as tree trunks. They wore tactical black cargo pants and tight black t-shirts that strained against their muscles. They did not carry clipboards. They carried zip ties and tasers. I had paid $5,000 per man for the night to ensure that if the Kowalskis decided to get physical, they would regret it instantly. The leader, a man named Stone, who looked like he was carved out of granite, nodded at me. He did not smile. He simply tapped his earpiece and signaled for his team to mount up. Sheriff Miller pulled up a moment later, followed by 2 patrol cars. He stepped out of his vehicle and paused when he saw my private army. He looked at the wall of muscle standing behind me and then at me. He looked nervous. He knew that the dynamic had shifted. Yesterday he was lecturing me about civil rights. Today he was leading a raid alongside a private hit squad. "We are going to do this by the book, Monique," the sheriff said, his voice wavering slightly. "My deputies will make the initial entry. Your men stay back unless there is a threat to safety." I looked at him coolly. "My men are here to protect my property, Sheriff. Since you failed to do that yesterday, I am making sure it gets done tonight. Let us move." The convoy rolled out. It looked less like a neighborhood dispute and more like a military strike on a cartel compound. The sheriff led the way, his lights flashing silently, cutting through the dark shadows of the trees. My Bentley was in the center, flanked on all sides by the black SUVs. We took up the entire width of the road, a rolling wall of steel and justice moving at 40 miles per hour. My heart pounded a rhythmic beat against my ribs. For 24 hours I had felt helpless. I had watched them destroy my floors, mock my grandmother, and steal my car. I had felt the sting of their laughter and the weight of their entitlement. But as we turned onto Ocean Drive and the headlights swept across the trees, that feeling of helplessness evaporated. I was not a victim anymore. I was the general returning to the front lines. We approached the broken gate. The house sat in total darkness, a black void against the night sky thanks to the power cut. But as the convoy turned into the driveway, 8 pairs of high-beam headlights simultaneously blasted the front of the house. The entire property was instantly illuminated in blinding white light. I saw movement in the living room windows. Shadows scrambling, figures ducking. They were like cockroaches when the kitchen light snaps on. They knew. In that moment, as the tires crunched over the gravel and the doors of the squad cars flew open, they knew that the party was officially over. The sudden flood of light from 8 vehicles turned the dark living room into a stage, exposing every dirty secret inside. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, I saw the Kowalskis scramble like insects when a rock is lifted. They were blinded, shielding their eyes against the high beams, stumbling over the trash they had scattered across my floor. Sheriff Miller stepped behind the open door of his cruiser and raised a megaphone to his lips. His voice boomed through the night air, amplified and distorted, drowning out the sound of the ocean. "This is the Sag Harbor Police Department. Occupants of 42 Ocean Drive, come out with your hands above your heads immediately. This is your final warning." Most people would have surrendered. Most people would have realized that when a SWAT team is on your lawn, the party is over. But Frank Kowalski was not most people. He was a man who had lost his home in Ohio, his dignity, and now his temper. He was drunk on cheap beer and a misplaced sense of entitlement. Instead of walking toward the door with his hands up, I watched him stumble toward the massive stone fireplace in the center of the living room. My heart stopped. Above the mantel, mounted on two antique brass hooks, was a vintage 1892 Winchester lever action rifle. It was a collector piece I had bought at an auction for $12,000. It was beautiful, it was historic, and most importantly, it was disabled. The firing pin had been removed decades ago. It was a glorified paperweight. But the police outside did not know that. I watched in slow-motion horror as Frank reached up and grabbed the rifle. He swayed on his feet, clutching the wooden stock like it was a lifeline. He was shouting something at his family, probably telling them he would protect them, probably thinking he was John Wayne defending the Alamo. He turned toward the window, the barrel of the rifle swinging wildly. "Gun!" someone screamed. The atmosphere shifted instantly from an eviction to a kill zone. "Drop the weapon!" Sheriff Miller screamed, his voice cracking with genuine fear. He dropped the megaphone and drew his service pistol. Beside my car, Stone and his team of private contractors did not scream. They moved with terrifying silent efficiency. They raised their tactical rifles, the red laser sights cutting through the night air. 4 red dots danced across Frank's chest and forehead. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell that the gun was broken, that the old fool was just posturing, but I was frozen. Frank walked right up to the glass window, pressing the barrel of the antique rifle against the pane. He was squinting into the blinding lights, trying to see who was challenging him. He looked deranged. He looked like a man who had decided that if he could not have this house, no one would. "Frank, put the gun down," I whispered to myself inside the Bentley. "Do not be an idiot, Frank. They will kill you." Inside the house, I saw Brenda tackle Ebony to the floor, screaming. The children were diving behind the sofa. They understood the danger, even if Frank did not. The air crackled with the kind of tension that comes right before a tragedy. One wrong move, one accidental twitch of a finger, and my living room would be painted with blood. Frank yelled something unintelligible at the police, shaking the rifle. He was playing the tough guy one last time. He did not realize that he was bringing a prop to a gunfight, and the men outside were not playing a game. The silence between the sheriff's command and the inevitable trigger pull stretched out for what felt like an eternity. The standoff lasted exactly 4 seconds. That was as long as Stone, my head of security, was willing to wait. I saw him signal the sheriff a sharp cutting motion with his hand that meant we are done talking. The time for negotiation had expired the moment Frank pointed a weapon at law enforcement. The sheriff nodded and lowered his pistol just an inch, signaling his deputies to move in. I watched from the safety of the Bentley as the tactical team swarmed the porch. They did not use a key. They did not try the handle. 2 officers swung a heavy black battering ram against my custom mahogany double doors. The sound was a sickening wet crunch that I felt in my teeth. The wood, which had been imported from Brazil and hand-carved by artisans, splintered like matchsticks. The lock mechanism I had paid thousands for sheared off, instantly flying into the dark hallway like a bullet. The doors swung open violently, slamming against the interior walls. "Police, get down on the ground!" The officers screamed, their voices overlapping into a wall of noise. Inside the living room, time seemed to speed up. Frank turned toward the noise, his movements sluggish and confused. He still held the antique Winchester rifle in his hands, but the arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by sheer terror. He tried to raise the barrel, not to shoot, but out of instinct. It was the worst mistake he could have made. Stone did not hesitate. He moved faster than a man of his size should be able to move. He sprinted through the shattered doorway and launched himself at Frank. It was not a fight. It was physics. 250 pounds of trained muscle collided with a 60-year-old drunk man. Frank didn't even have time to scream. The impact lifted him off his feet. He flew backward, the rifle flying out of his hands and clattering uselessly across the floor. Frank hit the ground with a bone-shaking thud, his face smashing into the expensive Persian rug he had been so happy to dirty earlier. Before he could even draw a breath, Stone was on top of him. He drove his knee into Frank's lower back, pinning him to the floor with practiced brutality. He grabbed Frank's right arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing the joint to the breaking point. "Do not move!" Stone roared right into Frank's ear. "Drop it! Hands behind your back!" Frank groaned, spitting blood onto the carpet. "My arm! You are breaking my arm!" "Stop resisting," the sheriff yelled, rushing in to assist. The clicking of handcuffs echoed through the silent room. It was a sharp, metallic sound that signaled the end of Frank's reign. The man who had sat in my chair and mocked my grandmother's letter was now face down in the dirt, helpless and subdued. I watched the other officers sweep the room. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, blinding the rest of the family. Brenda was screaming in the corner, her hands over her head. The children were crying. But Frank was the centerpiece. He lay there panting, struggling against the weight of the man on top of him. The rifle lay 5 feet away, a harmless piece of metal that had just cost him his freedom. I rolled down the window of the Bentley, letting the cool night air rush in. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold satisfaction. They had broken my door. They had terrified my neighbors. But as I watched the sheriff haul Frank up by his collar, dragging him toward the door like a sack of potatoes, I knew it was worth it. The king was captured. The castle was retaken. And the purge had only just begun. While the tactical team was busy securing the living room, and Frank was being hauled off the floor, I noticed a shadow moving on the peripheral screen of my security monitor inside the car. It was a movement so cowardly, it was almost impressive. While his mother screamed, and his father was being pinned to the ground, Hunter Kowalski was not trying to help them. He was not standing by his wife. He was sliding the back glass slider open, inches at a time, trying to slip into the darkness like a rat abandoning a sinking ship. He sprinted across the manicured lawn, his bare feet slapping against the dew-covered grass. He was heading for the 6-foot cedar privacy fence that separated my estate from the wooded nature preserve behind it. He looked like a desperate animal running on pure adrenaline and fear. He reached the fence and jumped, scrabbling at the wood with his fingernails. He kicked his legs wildly, trying to find purchase, his breath coming in ragged gasps that I could hear even from the driveway. He pulled himself up halfway, his stomach scraping against the rough wood, his face twisted in a panic. He actually thought he was going to make it. He thought he could just hop a fence run through the woods and disappear, leaving his wife and parents to face the felony charges alone. But he forgot one thing. I had anticipated every exit strategy. Just as he swung one leg over the top of the fence, a massive hand clamped onto his ankle. It was one of Stone's private contractors who had been stationed in the backyard specifically for this moment. The guard did not pull Hunter down gently. He yanked him. Hunter shrieked as he was ripped from the fence, crashing down into the dirt with a bone-jarring thud that knocked the wind out of him. Before he could even think about scrambling up, a heavy tactical boot was pressed firmly against his chest, pinning him to the earth. I opened the door of the Bentley and stepped out onto the gravel. I walked around the side of the house, my heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. I took my time. I wanted to savor this. I approached the spot where he lay, writhing under the weight of the guard. I stopped 2 feet away from him, looking down at his heaving chest and his terrified eyes. He looked up at me, blinking against the harsh beam of the bodyguard's flashlight. He looked pathetic. He looked small. He looked exactly like the fraud he was. Running away so soon, I asked, my voice smooth and calm, cutting through the night air like a knife. "The party is just getting started, Hunter." Hunter wheezed, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Monique, wait. Please, I was just going to get help, I swear. This is all a misunderstanding. I did not mean to." I laughed, a cold, sharp sound that made him flinch. "You were leaving them, Hunter. You were leaving your wife and your mother to take the fall. You really are a special kind of coward, aren't you?" I leaned down closer so he could see the absolute lack of mercy in my eyes. The shadows danced across his face as the blue and red police lights flashed from the front of the house. "You have a choice to make right now," I said, keeping my voice low and dangerous. Although honestly, both options end in a concrete cell. You are wanted in Ohio for wire fraud and embezzlement, and now you are wanted in New York for forgery, burglary, and malicious destruction of property. So tell me, where do you want to be processed? The prisons in Ohio are overcrowded and dirty, but I hear Rikers Island here in New York is particularly brutal this time of year. So which one do you prefer? Choose your cage. Hunter started to sob, real ugly tears mixing with the dirt on his face. "Monique, please. We are family. Do not do this. I will pay you back. I will fix the gate." I stood up and signaled the bodyguard with a curt nod. "You cannot fix this, Hunter. You signed the lease, remember? You signed your own warrant." I turned my back as the bodyguard hauled him up by his armpits, dragging him toward the waiting police cars. His feet dragged through the grass and his cries for mercy faded into the background music of justice being served. He tried to run from his debts, but tonight the collection agency had finally caught up. The silence that followed the chaos of the arrest was heavier than the noise. Hunter was gone, dragged kicking and screaming into the back of a squad car. Frank was sitting on the bumper of another cruiser, his head hanging low in defeat. That left the women. The living room of my sanctuary was a wreck. Broken glass glittered on the floor like diamonds, and the smell of stale beer was everywhere. But the most pathetic sight was not the furniture. It was the people. Brenda Kowalski, the woman who had treated me like a servant less than 12 hours ago, shuffled toward me. She had lost her shoes in the scramble. Her floral caftan was torn at the shoulder. She did not look at me with arrogance anymore. She looked at me with the terrified eyes of an animal that knows it is cornered. She stopped 3 feet away, and then she did something I never thought I would see. She dropped to her knees. Her heavy frame hit the floor with a thud right onto the expensive rug she had allowed her guests to trample. She clasped her hands together in a caricature of prayer. "Monique, please," she sobbed, her voice trembling and wet. "We are old people. We did not know. Hunter told us it was his house. He told us he rented it. We are just innocent victims here. You cannot let them take us to jail. We have health issues. Frank has a bad back. Please tell the sheriff it was a mistake." I watched her beg. I watched the woman who had snapped her fingers at me and demanded ice now groveling at my feet. I waited for a spark of pity. I waited for that familiar urge to help to fix things, to be the bigger person. But I felt nothing. It was as if my heart had turned into a block of ice. Then Ebony moved. My little sister, who had stood by and watched them mock me, threw herself at my legs. She wrapped her arms around my ankles, burying her face in my shins. Her tears soaked through the fabric of my trousers. "Monique, stop this," she cried hysterically. "This has gone too far. They are family. We are sisters. You cannot send my in-laws to prison. Think about what people will say. Think about Mom and Dad. Please just tell the officers to let them go. I will do anything. I will pay you back every cent. Just make it stop." I looked down at the top of her head. I remembered braiding her hair when we were children. I remembered holding her hand when she was scared of the dark. But the woman clinging to my leg was not that child. This was a woman who had sold me out for a taste of popularity. This was a woman who had watched her husband steal from me and said nothing. I slowly peeled her fingers off my leg one by one. I stepped back, creating a physical distance between us that mirrored the emotional canyon that had just opened up. I looked at Brenda kneeling on the floor. I looked at Ebony sprawled out in her desperation. And I realized with a sudden crystal clarity that I did not know these people. They were not my family. They were strangers who had broken into my house. "I am sorry," I said, my voice sounding distant and hollow even to my own ears. "But I cannot help you. The homeowner, Monique Vance, left the building a long time ago. I am just the plaintiff now, and plaintiffs do not negotiate with criminals." I turned my back on their wailing. I walked toward the sheriff, who was waiting by the door. I did not look back. I did not want to see their faces. I wanted to remember them as they were yesterday, arrogant and cruel, because that was the truth. The begging was just a performance, and the curtain had already come down. The quiet exclusivity of Ocean Drive had been replaced by the chaotic symphony of justice. The strobe lights from 6 police cruisers sliced through the darkness, painting the manicured lawns in rhythm of blue and red. But the police were not the only audience for this finale. The flashing lights had acted like a beacon summoning every neighbor within a mile radius. They stood at the edge of their driveways wrapped in cashmere robes holding glasses of wine, watching the spectacle with rapt attention. And right in the center of the crowd, standing on top of a stone landscaping wall, was Mrs. Rothstein. She was holding her smartphone up with a steadiness that betrayed her age. She was not just recording a video, she was live streaming. I could see the glow of the screen reflecting on her glasses and the rapid cascade of comments scrolling up the side as the neighborhood watch group and half of the town tuned in to watch the downfall of the Kowalskis. "I am zooming in now," Mrs. Rothstein narrated, her voice projecting clearly over the low murmur of the crowd. "Here they come, ladies and gentlemen. The squatters who have been terrorizing our street for 24 hours. Look at them. No shame, no respect." The front door opened, and the walk of shame began. It was a stark contrast to the party scene from earlier that day. Hunter was first flanked by 2 deputies. He was hunched over, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back, his face swollen from crying. He tried to hide his face from the glare of the lights, but there was nowhere to hide. The camera caught every inch of his humiliation. Next was Frank, stumbling and shouting incoherent curses about his rights. Then Brenda, weeping openly, her makeup running in dark streaks down her face. As they were shoved into the back of the squad cars, the crowd actually applauded. It was a polite golf clap, but it stung more than a slap. They were cheering for the removal of the infection. I walked over to the stone wall where Mrs. Rothstein was filming. I looked impeccable. My suit was unwrinkled, my posture perfect, my face calm. Mrs. Rothstein saw me coming and turned the camera toward me. "And here is the hero of the hour," she announced. "Monique, tell the people what happened." I looked directly into the lens of the camera. I did not smile. I did not look angry. I looked like a CEO delivering a quarterly report on a failed acquisition. I imagined Ebony watching this from the hallway. I imagined Hunter watching it from a jail cell later. I imagined every person who had ever thought they could use me watching. "This is not a tragedy," I said, my voice clear and steady. "This is a correction. What you see behind me is not just an arrest, it is the inevitable result of entitlement. These people thought that because they were family, they were entitled to what I built. They thought that hard work was something for other people to do while they enjoyed the view." I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. Let this be a lesson for anyone watching who thinks they can take what is not theirs. This is a lesson for the lazy, for the leeches, and for anyone who wants to enjoy the fruit without watering the tree. You cannot build a life on the sweat of someone else. Eventually, the bill comes due, and as you can see tonight, the price of betrayal is very high. I nodded to Mrs. Rothstein and turned away, walking back toward my house. The camera followed me, capturing the image of a woman who had reclaimed her kingdom. The live stream ended, but the message was permanent. The bank was closed, and the owner had finally gone home. The blue and red lights of the police cruisers strobed against the dark trees, creating a chaotic disco effect on the driveway. The air was filled with the crackle of police radios and the heavy shuffling of feet, but suddenly, a voice cut through the noise, like a serrated knife. It was Hunter. As the deputy tried to guide his head into the back of the patrol car, he planted his feet and twisted his body around violently. He was not trying to escape anymore. He was trying to find a target for his rage. His eyes locked onto Ebony, who was standing near the crushed gate, shivering not from the cold, but from shock. She looked small and broken, her arms wrapped around herself as she watched her husband being taken away. But Hunter did not look at her with love. He did not look at her with concern. He looked at her with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. "This is your fault," he screamed, his voice breaking into a hysterical shriek. "You did this, Ebony. You told me she was stupid. You told me she was soft. You said your sister was a pushover who would never call the cops on family. Ebony flinched as if he had physically struck her. She took a step back, shaking her head. Hunter, no, she whispered, but he shouted over her, drowning out her defense. You lied to me, he roared, spit flying from his mouth. You said she was desperate. You said she was easy to trick. You promised me a free ride, Ebony. You said we could live here for months and she would just take it because she is lonely. You are the one who ruined us. You are useless. The words hung in the air, toxic and heavy. But it did not stop there. The accusation acted like a spark in a room full of gasoline. Brenda, who was being handcuffed by another officer, turned her head. The realization washed over her. It wasn't the police's fault. It wasn't Monique's fault. In her twisted mind, it was the daughter-in-law who had failed to deliver the goods. You piece of trash, Brenda yelled, lunging toward Ebony before the officer yanked her back. You brought us here. You said you had it handled. Look at my husband. Look at him on the ground. This is on you. Suddenly, the rest of the Kowalski clan turned on her. The cousins, the aunts, the people who had been drinking my wine and eating my food an hour ago began to jeer. One of the cousins, who had not been restrained yet, rushed forward and shoved Ebony hard. She stumbled backward, her heels catching on the gravel, and she fell hard, landing on her hands and knees. You ruined our vacation! The cousin spat down at her. You are a curse! Ebony looked up from the ground, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the dust. She looked at her husband, expecting him to defend her. But Hunter was just watching through the window of the police car, shaking his head in disgust. He had washed his hands of her. Then Ebony looked at me. I was standing 10 feet away on the stone steps of my porch. I was elevated above the chaos, perfectly safe, perfectly calm. Our eyes met. I saw the desperation in hers. I saw the silent plea. She wanted me to step in. She wanted the big sister who used to fight her bullies on the playground. She wanted me to tell the officers to stop, to tell the in-laws to back off. But I did not move. I did not unclasp my hands. I stood there like a statue made of ice. I watched her own husband throw her to the wolves. I watched the family she had chosen over me treat her like garbage. And I let it happen. I let her feel every ounce of that gravel digging into her knees. I let her hear every insult. She had spent years telling them I was the villain. Now she was finally meeting the real bad guys, and I was not going to rob her of that educational experience. I simply turned my head away and watched the police finish their job, leaving her alone on the ground in the wreckage of her own choices. The fluorescent lights of the Sag Harbor courthouse buzzed with a low, irritating hum that seemed to vibrate against the cheap wood paneling of the room. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, less than 12 hours after the raid on my estate, but the wheels of justice were turning with terrifying speed. I sat in the back row of the gallery, my posture perfect, my face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. I was not there to testify. I was there to witness. The side door opened, and the bailiff announced the arrival of the defendant. Hunter Kowalski shuffled into the room. The arrogance that he had worn like a second skin yesterday was gone. In its place was an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame and a pair of heavy steel shackles that connected his ankles. He walked with small, shuffling steps, the chains clinking rhythmically against the floor. He looked exhausted. His eyes were red and swollen, and he kept glancing around the room with the frantic energy of a trapped animal. When his eyes finally found me in the back row, he stopped. He opened his mouth to say something, but the bailiff shoved him forward toward the defense table. The judge was a stern woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She did not look at Hunter with pity. She looked at him with the exhausted patience of someone who deals with idiots all day. She put on her reading glasses and picked up the file on her desk. Mr. Kowalski, she began, her voice echoing in the silent room. You are before this court on 3 felony charges: burglary in the 2nd degree for unlawfully remaining in a dwelling, criminal possession of a forged instrument in the 2nd degree for the falsified lease agreement, and grand larceny in the third degree regarding the misappropriation of property. Hunter's public defender, a young man who looked like he had not slept in a week, leaned over and whispered to him. I could see Hunter's face go pale. He started to shake his head rapidly, whispering back, but the lawyer just placed a hand on his shoulder to silence him. The prosecutor stood up. Your Honor, given the defendant's attempt to flee the scene last night and the discovery of outstanding warrants for wire fraud in the state of Ohio, the people are requesting that bail be denied. This individual has demonstrated a clear flight risk and a pattern of criminal deception. We intend to pursue the maximum sentence for these charges, which, given the aggravating factors, will be 5 years in a state correctional facility. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. 5 years. I watched Hunter physically recoil as if he had been punched in the gut. He slumped forward in his chair, putting his head in his hands. He was doing the math in his head. 5 years meant no summer parties. 5 years meant no luxury cars. 5 years meant he would be nearly 40 years old when he saw freedom again. My lawyer David stood up next. He did not look at Hunter. He addressed the judge. Your Honor, on behalf of the victim, Ms. Vance, we are also filing for a permanent restraining order against the defendant and his extended family. My client has been subjected to significant financial loss and emotional distress. The judge nodded, stamping a document with a loud, heavy thud that sounded like a gavel strike. So ordered. Bail is set at $500,000 cash, which I assume, given the defendant's current financial status, is not an option. Mr. Kowalski, you are remanded to the custody of the sheriff until your trial. 2 deputies moved in instantly, pulling Hunter up by his arms. He looked back at me one last time. He did not look angry anymore. He looked broken. He mouthed the word please, but no sound came out. I did not react. I did not nod. I did not smile. I simply watched as the doors swallowed him up, erasing him from my life as efficiently as I had erased his signature from my house. The hearing had lasted less than 15 minutes, but it had sealed his fate for half a decade. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of the courtroom. The air outside tasted sweeter than it ever had before. The dust had settled on Ocean Drive, but the financial fallout was just beginning to rain down. 3 days after the arrest, I sat in the conference room of my attorney's Midtown Manhattan office. The air smelled of expensive leather and floor wax. Across the table sat Ebony. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had thrown that party. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, she wore no makeup, and her eyes were rimmed with dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights. She was alone. Hunter was in a cell, and his parents were back in Ohio, dealing with their own legal nightmares. That left Ebony as the sole survivor, and unfortunately for her, the sole bearer of responsibility. David, my lawyer, did not speak. He simply slid a heavy bound document across the polished mahogany table. It landed in front of Ebony with a dull, heavy thud that sounded like a coffin closing. What is this? Ebony whispered, her voice trembling. It is the bill, I said, simply taking a sip of sparkling water. It is an itemized invoice for the last 24 hours of your husband's little vacation. Ebony opened the folder. I watched her eyes widen as she scanned the lines. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. $40,000 for the destroyed electronic gate, $30,000 for the ruined Persian rug, $12,000 for the antique Winchester rifle Frank had damaged, $15,000 for the deep cleaning required to remove the stench of 30 people living without plumbing. And then the heavy hitters, $50,000 in legal fees, $20,000 for the private security team. The list went on and on, totaling every single penny of chaos they had caused. She flipped to the last page and gasped. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and gray. $250,000, she choked out. Monique, I cannot pay this. You know I cannot pay this. Hunter is in jail. We have no income. This is impossible. I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. It is not impossible, Ebony. It is necessary. Hunter has no assets. His parents are destitute. You are the only one who signed the guarantee on the credit cards. You are the only one who facilitated their entry. You are the only one left to pay the tab. She started to cry, but these were not the manipulative tears of before. These were the tears of someone watching their life disintegrate. I will have to sell everything, she sobbed. My car, my jewelry, everything, I confirmed. The next week was a blur of liquidation. I did not intervene. I did not offer a loan. I simply watched from a distance as the consequences took physical form. Ebony sold her luxury sedan for cash at a loss. She took the diamond earrings I had bought her for her 30th birthday to a pawn shop. She listed her designer handbags on resale sites, desperately trying to scrape together enough cash to keep the creditors at bay. But it was not enough. It is never enough when the hole is that deep. 10 days later, I received the notification. Ebony had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Her credit score was decimated. Her assets were seized. She was moving out of her trendy apartment and into a studio in Queens. She had lost her husband, her reputation, and her financial future in the span of 48 hours. She had bet everything on the lie that I was a pushover, and she had lost. I filed the bankruptcy notice in my drawer. I would not get my money back, but that was never the point. The debt was paid in a different currency. She had paid with her pride, and that was a price I was willing to accept. The air in the visitor center smelled of bleach and unwashed bodies, a sharp contrast to the lavender scent of my office. I sat perfectly still on the cold steel stool, my hands folded on the scratched metal ledge. On the other side of the thick plexiglass, Hunter looked like a shadow of the man he used to be. 6 months of state prison food and fear had hollowed out his cheeks and dulled the arrogant shine in his eyes. He picked up the black phone receiver, his hand trembling slightly. He did not ask how I was. He just looked at me with a mix of confusion and dread, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "You look tired, Hunter," I said, my voice calm and distorted slightly by the phone line. "I just wanted to stop by and give you some news about your parents. I know you have been worried about them since the foreclosure." Hunter leaned forward, his eyes widening. "Are they okay? Did they find a place to live?" I smiled. It was a small, tight smile. "They did. They are actually back in their old house in Ohio. You see, the bank put it up for auction last week. And I bought it. I purchased the deed for cash. It was a steal, really." Hunter froze. The receiver slipped slightly in his sweaty grip as the color drained from his face. "So you do not need to worry," I continued, leaning in closer to the glass. "Frank and Brenda are safe. They are currently signing a month-to-month lease with my holding company. They are my tenants now, Hunter. And I can promise you I will be a very attentive landlord. If they are one day late with the rent, or if they break a single rule, they will be on the street. I own their roof. I own their peace of mind. And I just wanted you to know that every time they go to sleep at night, they are sleeping in my house." I hung up the phone before he could scream. I stood up and walked away, leaving him staring at the glass, mouthing words that no one would ever hear. The fluorescent lights of the supercenter buzzed overhead with a low drone that seemed to drill directly into Ebony's skull. She stood behind Register 4 in her blue polyester vest, which was a size too big and smelled faintly of the previous employee's cheap cologne. The scanner beeped with a relentless rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. It was the soundtrack of her new reality. Her feet were swollen in her non-slip shoes, and her lower back throbbed, a constant reminder that she had been standing for 6 hours straight without a break. A heavy hand slammed a bottle of laundry detergent onto the belt, making Ebony jump. She looked up into the angry face of a customer who looked suspiciously like her mother-in-law, Brenda. "This coupon is valid," the woman shouted, her voice attracting stares from the line behind her. "It says 50 cents off. Are you stupid or just lazy?" Learn to do your job or go back to school. Ebony felt the heat rise in her cheeks. A year ago, she would have laughed in this woman's face. A year ago, she would have been driving a luxury sedan to a spa appointment. But a year ago, she had a sister who paid her bills. Now she had nothing. "I am sorry, ma'am," Ebony whispered, keeping her eyes on the scanner. "The system rejected it. I will call a manager." She waited for the override key, her head hanging low in humiliation. As she waited, her eyes drifted to the magazine rack stocked next to the chewing gum and batteries. Her breath caught in her throat. Staring back at her from the glossy cover of Forbes magazine was a face she knew better than her own. It was Monique. She looked radiant. She was wearing a white power suit, standing on the balcony of the Hamptons estate with the ocean glistening behind her. The headline screamed in bold gold letters, "The Iron Lady: How Monique Vance Turned Betrayal into a Billion-Dollar Empire." Monique looked powerful, untouchable, and serene. Ebony looked at her sister's face and then caught her own reflection in the plexiglass sneeze guard. She looked gray and defeated. The contrast was a physical blow. She realized then that she was not just scanning groceries. She was paying the price for every free meal she had ever eaten and every insult she had ever laughed at. She reached out to touch the magazine, but the manager slapped his key onto the register, making her flinch. "Back to work, Ebony," he snapped. "Stop daydreaming." Ebony pulled her hand back. She scanned the detergent. She bagged the groceries. And she left the magazine right where it was, a glossy reminder of the paradise she had burned to the ground. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, amber glow over the newly replaced teak deck of my Hamptons estate. The air did not smell of stale beer and desperation anymore. It smelled of sizzling Wagyu beef, vintage Cabernet, and the salty ocean breeze. I stood by the grill holding a crystal glass of wine, watching the people gathered around my fire pit. It was a small group. There was David, my attorney, laughing at a joke. There was Mrs. Rothstein, the neighbor who had helped save my home, sipping champagne and actually smiling for the first time in 20 years. And there were a few close business partners, people who had built their own empires and did not need to steal from mine. I looked at the spot where Frank had been arrested. It was now covered by a beautiful potted olive tree, a symbol of peace. I looked at the gate where Hunter had tried to run. It was reinforced steel, now strong and impenetrable. The house had been scrubbed clean. I had replaced every rug, every piece of furniture, and every memory. It was not just a renovation. It was an exorcism. The energy of the parasites was gone, replaced by the hum of genuine conversation and mutual respect. David raised his glass, catching my eye from across the patio. "To the winner," he said, soft enough that only I could hear. I did not say anything. I just smiled and took a sip of my wine. The silence that fell over the group was not awkward, and it was not lonely. It was the rich, heavy silence of peace. I had lost a sister, but I had found myself. And as I looked out at the dark ocean, I realized that this was not a lonely life. It was a sanctuary, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly happy to be home. I stand on the balcony of my bedroom listening to the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the shore. It is the only sound I hear. There is no television blaring. There is no screaming. There is no one asking me where the credit cards are. For a long time, I was afraid of this silence. I was afraid that if I stopped giving, if I stopped fixing, if I stopped paying, I would be alone. I was raised to believe that family is the most important thing in the world. We are told from the time we are children that blood is thicker than water. We are told that you never turn your back on your kin, no matter how much they hurt you. But as I look out at the dark water tonight, I realize that is a dangerous lie. It is a lie that toxic people tell you to keep you in chains. For years, I let the Kowalskis and my own sister treat me like a resource instead of a human being. I let them mistake my kindness for weakness and my generosity for stupidity. I thought if I just gave a little more, if I was just a little more patient, they would finally love me the way I wanted to be loved. But love is not a transaction. You cannot buy respect. And you certainly cannot rent loyalty. I learned that the hard way. I learned that there are people in this world who will drain you until you are a husk, and then complain that you are not full enough. People ask me how I could do it, how I could send my own sister to bankruptcy court, how I could put my sister's husband in a cell. They call it cold. They call it cruel. But they do not understand the nature of survival. A tumor is made of your own cells. It shares your blood. It lives in your body. It is technically a part of you. But if you do not cut it out, it will consume you. It will eat everything healthy until there is nothing left. Cutting it out is painful. The surgery leaves a scar. The recovery is lonely. But it is the only way for the body to live. I chose to live. Family is not about whose DNA you share. It is not about a common last name or a shared history. Family is about respect. It is about the people who bring you soup when you are sick, not the people who ask for your credit card when you are vulnerable. It is about the people who celebrate your success, not the ones who try to tear it down out of jealousy. I looked at my table tonight, and I saw my real family, my attorney, my neighbor, my friends, people who expect nothing from me but my company. As for Ebony and Hunter and the rest of them, I do not hate them. Hate takes too much energy, and I am done wasting my energy on them. I simply feel nothing. They are just a lesson I had to learn, a storm I had to weather. I am a survivor who finally removed the sickness from my life. I breathe the salt air deeply, filling my lungs without the weight of their expectations pressing on my chest. I am alone in this big, beautiful house, but for the first time in my life, I am not lonely. I am whole. I am healthy, and most importantly, I am free. And that freedom is worth every single penny I lost to get here. The most painful lesson Monique learned is that access to your life, your home, and your success is a privilege, not a birthright. Blood relation does not grant anyone immunity from consequences. When you weaponize your empathy to save people who secretly resent you, you aren't being a good sister. You are being a victim. Real family protects your peace. They don't destroy your sanctuary. Remember, setting a firm boundary might make you the villain in their story, but it makes you the hero in yours. It is better to walk alone in peace than to be surrounded by people who only value what you can provide. Drop a freedom in the comments if you are ready to choose your peace over their expectations, and subscribe to the channel for more stories where justice is finally served.